So I'm Neil Thompson. I'm with the Amazon Books team, and I'm here with George Saunders, whose 10th of December was picked as one of our best books of the month in January. It's currently a New York Times bestseller. It's an Amazon bestseller, and congratulations. It's
Thanks.
just phenomenal. It's
been nice.
a huge success. So I think you're the first short story writer I know who's become suddenly a rock star.
Loose definition of rock star.
You've been doing shows. You were telling me about being on Charlie Rose and Stephen Colbert last week. Not exactly sudden. You've been doing this for a long time. People know who you are, but surprised by the reaction to this book?
Yeah, really surprised. And kind of, it's fun. It's like a kind of a late life surprise. And I was thinking it's a little bit like when you're walking somewhere and you walk past a house inside of which a great meal is being cooked, and you kind of go, wow, and you linger on the sidewalk, and it's not your house and it's not real, but it's kind of fun to just be there and enjoy a little bit. So the last month has been kind of like that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to see.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on what it means for short story writing in general, for the form? You got to be sort of proud that you're sort of this.
Yeah, well, I hope so, because it's such a beautiful form, and I don't really understand why it isn't more accepted by people. There's so many great writers working in it, so I think the New York Times article was a great sort of cannon shot, and so my hope is that people would just take some pleasure in those stories, and then look for the real masters like Tobias Wolff and Alice Munro and Stuart Dybek and William Trower, and because it's a form that's beautifully suited to the way we live. It sort of tells deep truths really quickly in a way that I think any human being is going to relate to. So if anything I could do in that regard, it'd be great.
That's nice. Well, you mentioned some of the masters. Are the people growing up who you read and who inspired you to focus on this short form?
Yeah, well, I mean, Hemingway was his book In Our Time was a huge influence for, not just for me, but I think our whole generation of writers. Raymond Carver I studied at Syracuse just after he left, so he was a big presence. The Russian writer Isaac Babel is somebody who Hemingway praised him as being even more efficient than Hemingway himself was. So he's a big influence. And then, of course, I studied with Tobias Wolff at Syracuse, and so just as a man and as a writer, he was very, very important. Laurie Moore is somebody whose work I really, really love. So I could list. I mean, there's so many great story writers, and
well, it's interesting because we at Amazon just noticed this recent spate of really great short story collections, starting with yours. There's a new one out now by Jim Gavin called Middlemen.
Yeah.
So there seems to be sort of a little moment for short stories.
Yeah. Well, I think it might be the MFA programs are a great place to work on short stories. So you've got now several generations of people who have really cut their artistic teeth on them and are kind of, in their reading habits, are very fine-tuned to the nuances and the strengths and so on. So I think it's a happy sign.
Anybody coming up who you're excited about or reading currently, somebody on the nightstand who...
Sure. Well, one of my former students, Adam Levin, has an incredible book called Hot Pink that's really, really wonderful. I just read a really wonderful book by, it's not short stories, but Horatio Moya called Senselessness, that actually Adam and my daughter recommended to me, and he's I think a Salvadoran writer here in the U.S. A book called Europeana by Patrick O'Rednick, which is kind of a weird book of facts that kind of walks you through the 20th century, just slightly askew, and you come out of it kind of like astonished by the things you didn't know. And so those are three I'm really following.
So let's talk just real briefly about 10th of December. Can you sum it up in a sentence? I mean, there are some themes that I noticed, but in your view, what was it?
It's hard
about?
because this book, one of the stories I wrote in '94, one I started in '98, most since 2006. So it's kind of hard to sum it up, but I think in my life and in my writing, I'm trying to open up just a little more to what I think of as positive valences. So I think maybe my early work was sort of disaster-based. I mean, it was kind of like, here's the worst day you could ever have, and exploring that as one very viable sort of human experience. And as I'm getting older, I'm just trying to figure out a way to represent another flavor, which is that sometimes things actually turn out well if we behave in a certain way. And just, again, it wasn't really a conscious thing, but it's in my marrow kind of these days to start thinking about how might we represent positive emotion, positive motivation, and avoid being sentimental or kind of saccharine.
Because there seemed to be some hope in there in some of these stories that were dark or heading in a bad direction, but might.
Yeah, I think a lot about that Portuguese form fado, which is a kind of a very lamenting song, like flamenco on downers, you know, and and when you hear somebody singing it beautifully, it's not a downer. It's she's singing about something sad, singing about fate, and you know, but there's something in the voice that makes you think, wow, life is still there, you know. So some quality like that is what I'm kind of looking for.
Real quickly on your process and your space, I'd love to know where you work, if there's a set place that you go to every day, if there's a routine, and then also you know, how your work on these pieces has evolved over time. Do you sit down and go beginning to end in a short story? Do you dabble and then come back to it and come back to it and go bounce around from different stories?
Well, I mean, as far as the space goes, there's an old tool shed on our property that we revamped. So now the joke is that I'm now the only tool in the tool shed. But the process is, it's sort of iterative. Like I start with a small little fragment of something that interests me, often for reasons I don't really, you know, I can't really explain. And then just start working it and working it and working it to taste. Like just trying to make the sentences a little edgier and kind of something, you know, I don't know what. And then slowly, over hundreds of iterations, it starts to produce theme and plot and meaning and all that. So it's kind of like the example I always use is if you had an apartment and you just started taking one thing out and replacing it with something that you really loved, that apartment would slowly start to resemble you in ways that you couldn't have imagined. So stories like that, I'll get kind of a first draft going, and then just start working it over and over, and slowly it starts to tell me where it wants to go. So it's a process that isn't particularly intention driven. Like I really don't know what I'm doing when I start. I don't have any plans, and then slowly the story starts to kind of give you instructions, and like a big cruise ship, it starts to move towards some kind of. So it's very fascinating because you really don't know what you're doing, and you find out about 3/4 of the way through, and even then you can't grasp it too tightly. You have to be a little bit willing for the story to push back a little bit.
And sometimes you can just let go. I mean, do you know when it is what it is?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I always say that it's like there's a little meter in your head, and this is positive, this is negative. And if you can get through the whole thing with the needle somewhat in the positive range, you're getting pretty close.
Yeah. So I'm sure I'll be the first person to ask, so I'll take credit for it if there's something longer coming down the pike.
You know, I really never, I mean, I would love if there was, but I think for me, the first condition is make sure that what you're writing doesn't suck, and make sure that it engages. And sometimes a story will say, I will engage, but you've got to cut me in half. You have to, because it's too lazy. That tends to be the way it goes for me. So if ever some text says, hey, I need 40 more pages, I'd be thrilled. But I found from hard experience that when I say I'm writing a novel, it's not true necessarily. And then you spend a lot of time forcing the thing to be something it doesn't want to be, which is sort of intrinsically anti-art in a way. Yeah.
So you just don't know until it evolves into something.
I don't have the prejudice that, oh no, I never will. I just like, well, I've got some pages at home, and when I go back, I'm going to kick them around and see what it tells me to do. And if it says 80, good. Yeah. 20, fine. 3,000, all right. You know.
Nice. Yeah. A couple quick questions that a couple of our other editors on our team wanted me to ask, so I can't forget these. How important is it to you to teach?
Really important. I think when I first started, I had the sense it was something you did to, pay the bills. And I've been at Syracuse since '96, and I just kind of hard to articulate why, but it really just makes me happy to see, students that I had in '97 and '98 now 3 or 4 kids in publishing or not, and also just as a way of re-engaging with literature through the eyes of young people. It's really, really vital. So I love it.
Yeah. And let's see, let me just grab 1 or 2 more here. Do you have a prized or treasured possession?
Do I? I guess I have a Taylor guitar that I really like.
Oh, nice.
My wife got it for me for Christmas, and it's a pretty nice guitar. But other than that, not so much.
Do you have a memorable author moment?
Yeah, I made an ass of myself with Robert Stone one time when I was a student at Syracuse. We were he came to do a reading, and we knew him as this great novelist and somebody who actually had known Kerouac and Kesey. So a bunch of us are standing around in a circle nervously, not saying a word. And I'm thinking, God, you're with one of the Mary pranksters. Say something, don't let this opportunity pass. So I said, Mr. Stone, what's the next big thing? And even as I said it, I was like, oh no, you didn't just say that. And my friends were looking at me like, oh. And he very sweetly just kind of looked at me and he said, "Well, I guess that's up to you guys." You know. Yeah. But there was an awkward 3 milliseconds there where I thought my life was over.
That's a memorable moment.
Yeah.
And for you, what's the next big thing?
I've got 38 pages at home that are just sitting there kind of stinking up the joint. So I'll go home when this is over and kind of just start messing around and seeing. But I'm at the point now where I am so excited to go back and start working. And so that's a good way to live, just go back and see what occurs.
Well, congrats on the book.
Thank
you.
you.
Loved it.
Thanks so much.
Well deserved.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Good luck.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Thanks.